All right, we're official. So good afternoon. This is Erin Evans, council member in District 12 out in Hermitage. And we are here today to get started with the working group for the council onboarding subcommittee or whatever it is that we're going to call ourselves. But today we have several folks joining as part of the group. We have Councilman Speaker Pro Tem Jeff Syracuse. We have Councilwoman Gloria Hauser, Councilwoman at Large Berkeley Allen, and Councilwoman Joy Stiles. So the purpose of our call today is to work through the scope of our onboarding council member project. And so that's going to be the objective for today's call, and then we'll define what we are going to be doing in the future. But to really get us started, I wanted Councilman or Speaker Pro Tem Jeff Syracuse to give us some context about how this group is coming together and what has transpired to get us to this point. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Councilman Syracuse.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate everyone spending the extra time beyond serving on council to do this, but I think the end result is going to be something very beneficial for our constituents and those that are going to succeed us. Okay, this goes back to last fall and having conversations with Vice Mayor Schulman. And when I became pro tem, I said, is there something that I could do to support you and council beyond running the meeting when you need a break or whatnot? And he said, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of pieces moving around and things that we'd like to look into that we really have not spent the time to. And where we ended up was, well, this may seem, I don't know if this translates, but a strategic planning effort may sound more corporate on the private sector, but it sounds like that is something that we could use. We are so reactive. We don't spend a lot of time on preparing and being intentional about the direction that we're headed, and nothing political. This is just logistical, administrative, and operational, right? And the analogy, I guess, in a way that I used was that as district council members, we spend a lot of time trying to get investment in the departments that are going to help us put projects in our districts. But what we don't spend a lot of time is looking at our own department and the folks that support us to be successful. And so what I came up with was a proposal that is still kind of a working framework that I won't call it solidified yet, but is a strategic plan, and I'm calling it kind of a 4-pillar approach in order to do a couple few things. With 40 of us on council, plus vice mayor, plus clerk staff, council staff, gosh, we could get off the rails on this real easily, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why this has never really been tried before, because it's a gargantuan, it could be such a large thing that we don't have focus. So that's the idea of having a 4-pillar approach of broad categories and topics listed underneath of what we want to accomplish. And if you've been involved with strategic planning efforts before, it is each subtopic or initiative eventually should have a time frame on it, and when we anticipate having when we anticipate that initiative to be done. It holds us ourselves accountable and also helps manage expectations for everybody involved. So those 4 areas, we're looking at the human resources side. In speaking with Shannon Hall, our director of HR, 2005 or 6 is when the last time that we did kind of a deep dive study comparing our council staff and size to others across the country, and to use that information to say, are we staffed appropriately? Do we have the right kinds of positions? The right kind of staffing for a 21st century local legislative body or whatnot. That data was gathered in 2005, but nothing was ever really done with it. So that information needs to be refreshed. And internally at HR, they have some internal tools to help us to do that. The other piece was the second floor. So the last time that the Metro Historic Courthouse was redone was about 12, 13 years ago or so. Yeah. The clerk's office and that space was basically not really changed. The council side, Rosie was very involved with how it looks. I think we all agree, like I put in my email, that on the physical space, we're cramped on one side, especially on council nights, and we have all this space on the council office side. Is it the best use of our physical space on the second floor? So that's the big picture question there. And the other one is technology. Outside of the issues we've had with technology in the chamber, being virtual or whatnot, there are other things that I think we need to be able to plan for and to really look at, are we being as efficient as possible with our resources and applying effective technology, such as better mass email management or something like that, right? The new website is going to come out. Do we have a voice at the table as far as what we'd like our website to look like, how it's laid out, how we display information, how the clerk's office and the council side of the websites are laid out logically so that all of us, constituents and us, have an easy way of accessing information. So that's one area, right? You have to plan for it. And then finally is this topic here, which is a council member onboarding and training discussion and putting together some real tangible, whether it's documents or procedure manuals, things like that, that can be the standard, if you will, the best practices. So that especially when we all transition from running from office to being in office, it's like you're immediately expected to be an expert on a $2.4 billion budget, right? And you know all the departments, and well, gosh, that takes a good solid year, really, truly, to get really up to speed. And it would be really nice if we had very intentional, thoughtful onboarding programs and whatnot to use. And in talking to Shannon Hall, they are actually about to roll out an electronic platform for Metro employees to be able to have some training on demand or whatnot. And so that is, as an example, one thing that we can look into as far as this effort in having some more tools in the toolbox for council members to have some onboarding and training programs. So that's why we're here today to talk about the scope, I guess, of what we want to accomplish as far as onboarding and ongoing training and development of being good legislators.
May I ask a question that's relevant to the onboarding conversation, and it might be a little bit too in-depth at this point, and I am taking notes, everybody, and so I'll be happy to share my notes with everybody on the call after we're done. But with what HR is working on, the intent then, in addition to kind of whatever the required training is, like I saw that there was some domestic violence training emails that came out, is the intent for HR to be able to upload their own content in addition to anything that they may be using from other sources or other, the HR platform itself may have access to, or will we have the capacity to put something, anything that we create kind of in that same platform as part of that kind of learning management system?
I think a little bit of both, but more so the latter. I think that the things that we're able to come up with here will hopefully be the test of time that we can all look back and say, hey, we were part of that effort, and I'm so glad this council member is, up and running in 30 days, right?
Wouldn't that be great?
But yes, I think we have the ability with Councilmember Allen being part of this and being a district council member for 8 years and now at large. That's institutional knowledge that we can absolutely tap into. I do at every stage of all of these 4 major topics, I want to engage the staff as much as possible. And Rosie, of course, having institutional knowledge is going to be so valuable to us as we put together these things. And I've had good conversation with the staff. I sent them an email letting them know this was coming, and to let them know that this is all about supporting them and putting them first, and being supportive of them, because they have 41 different bosses plus their own. So it's there's a lot on them as well.
Right, because this is, I think the outcome of whatever it is that we do is going to showcase their capabilities more so than us try to usurp their responsibilities at all. It's going to be highlighting all the things that they can do instead of some of it being that we accidentally discover as new people. What their capabilities are and their, everything else. But I think that was a really good summary. Councilwoman Allen, I know you were in that, and I don't mean to put you on the spot because I didn't tell you I was going to ask this question, but the executive committee meeting, I guess from your perspective, since you are the only person on the call, that has served as a district CM 2 times, and then is now, a councilwoman at large, you've been through 3 kind of onboarding experiences. Right. And so I guess one thing I wanted to ask you as we were getting started is what really, were there things that you have experienced in those first, especially as a brand new person, but then in your subsequent years that you immediately thought, this is great, we could use more of this, or this could be potentially refined or more helpful maybe down the road?
I have to kind of envision where we were in each place. I can remember what, because I did one under Vice Mayor Diane Neighbors, and then one under Vice Mayor David Riley, and then one under Vice Mayor Jim Schulman. And they've all sort of had a different flavor. Certainly I appreciate the way that they broke it up into stuff. I think Jim had more topics, with shorter amounts of time. And I think we covered more material, which is good, but it, as you all remember, it's like drinking from a fire hose. There was, I guess in the second term, maybe because we had 2 different vice mayors, we had at least 2 sort of review sessions, which is probably a good idea, sort of to go back and say, I know we told you all this a year ago, but now that you've actually done it, when you hear this is available, you go, oh my gosh, it didn't mean anything to me when I heard it, and I've needed it this past year, and now I will know to go back to it. So I think there's no question that the retreat at the beginning of the year, of a long day or 2 days or whatever, is absolutely essential. But I think refresher courses along the way are really meaningful just because now that we've been through a budget, now going back and hearing about the capital spending plan and when, in the capital improvements budget, because we heard all that before, but those terms didn't mean anything to anybody. So I think it's great that we're thinking about just trying to create both a process and a database where people can go and find out what's available on an ongoing basis. I think would be really helpful. If we just, put it in some place. I still try to go back and find SharePoints that I've lost the link to now, so, the more idiot proof we can make it, the more useful it will be, I think. And I can't, as is often the case, I can't find it right now, but I had created sort of a tips for new council members, to hand to the new District 18 council member when he came on board. And I think having each of us be throwing stuff into a file now, 3 years ahead of time, or for some, 7 years ahead of time, just to be thinking ahead. Because then that creates a document that we can refer to when we get elected or when we pass it on to somebody else. But I think it's just helpful for us each individually to be working to create that. And if all 40 of us are doing it, then that could be an amazing resource.
Yeah. And that's especially important, I think, with this new group, since we will have had experiences that other, classes of council members have not, with the tornado and the pandemic, and how to best document those. And I know we haven't really been able to go back and kind of document the tornadoes specifically about things, like I wish I had known at, day 1 of the tornado. But for sure, but would be good for the next person that comes into this role.
There should be
to several points that have been made, as a new person looking back and thinking about a retreat at the very beginning, one of the things I think is really important is that we have a mock council session. And even if we, create false bills, we walk through that process. What happens if we want to amend a bill? What happens when someone calls the question? Just going through the basics, because a lot of us, whether you've had Robert's rules or not, you're like, oh, wait a minute, I was supposed to say such and such. Darn it, I missed my opportunity. I feel so foolish. And I'm on television looking.
Right.
Right. Well, and for me, I feel like I need multiple sessions because there's only so much you can absorb in one setting.
Yeah.
So I would be willing to give up 8 Saturdays in a row if it took like 3 hours a Saturday for 8 Saturdays, and do a bit that we could absorb and understand. Because I think sitting there and having people come in and talk for 10 minutes, then the next department, you're kind of in overwhelm.
Yeah.
At least I was.
Yeah.
And not necessarily even knowing what to ask. I think it would be really helpful if, I think someone mentioned PowerPoints and SharePoint, et cetera. It'd be really helpful if all the information might be available up front, that we knew this is where you go, and it's organized in a way that you knew which file to open to get what you needed, but that we actually broke it down into 3-hour segments, and maybe, like I say, have 4 segments or 10 or however many it took, so that then we would have some knowledge. It's kind of like with a baby, you don't expect them at 3 months to be able to talk in complete sentences. You expect them to know how to do certain things, like hold their head, So I mean, there are different steps in a human's learning process, and they're same thing with us on joining the council. I think all of us have a variety of backgrounds and enrichment of opportunities and skills that we've developed, but they're different. They're not necessarily the same, but we do need to know, as Joy was saying, how do you do this? How do you do that? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? So that we know the process. But like I said before, at the very beginning of the meeting, we need that cheat sheet. I need to know if something is happening in my district, what department is that? Who is over that area? So I can send the message to the right person and not have it take multiple days going through different people to try to determine it. Question, just this week, I had neighbors calling me because there was blasting and it was causing damage to their house. Even the people at Metro did not know who to call. It took a day and a half of multiple people in Metro saying, oh, that's the fire department. But nobody knew that day one. I mean, nobody in the council office, nobody at Public Works, nobody at Water, we just went on different departments to where it was finally determined, oh, it's the fire department that can tell you who had that blasting permit and where it's happening. So, I mean, even those who have been here a long time don't necessarily know where certain things fall. And I think it'd be really helpful for us to know which department does something fall in and who are the liaisons or the contact people we should be working with. Because
maybe there's a form that we could create, where, much to Berkeley's point and Gloria's, where we're going into a folder and we're sharing our information under a certain header. Mm-hmm. So it is, about blasting, who do we contact? Because I'm sure that we all have different people that we're calling for different things, and it might not necessarily be the exact point person that you would think, but we're still getting the request completed. Yeah. So let's figure out who is the appropriate person, and let's compile that information. So when you start, all you have to do is say, oh, well, here's a link to several folders, and they will point you in the right direction. If you have any questions about it, then you could ask council staff, right? So we have to make sure that council staff is also aware of this document, so they can be of assistance when you reach out and say, I need.
You're speaking my language, girl.
And that kind of brings back, Jeff, one of the questions I was asking Jeff as everybody was joining was around when we're considered official. And the reason why I asked that question is because, for those of us that didn't have a runoff, we were, hey, you're council member elect, in August, and then we still have the runoff. So there was still, a month, a little bit longer, before we were sworn in. And so, but really the job started basically immediately, with the exception of, some things as far as residents coming in, anticipating that you would know, where to go and what you were doing. And so
Yeah.
I guess my previous experience on when new hires are starting at a company, that typically there are things that are done kind of in advance of you being official. So that might be like, hey, here's all the benefit information you should be reading in advance and figuring out what you're going to do. And, some of the foundational HR kinds of things, but then also to the points of organization and what information that we end up with at the very end of this initiative, what could be provided to somebody prior to them being sworn in. And I don't know, and maybe this is a question I can just list and as a takeaway that we find out the answer to, but I would assume that there might be some kind of, legal issue potentially, I guess, with some information being available, but I don't really know. And so, Jeff or Berkeley, did you ever have exposure to anything prior to being sworn in, or was it all once you got sworn in and you were legit, that here was everything kind of kicked off and you had your conversations with Mrs. Hayes and you move forward?
I feel like this year was unusual, and I'm not sure if it was just because we had so many different turnovers in administration, but my memory of my first go round, which is now far enough ago that it could be totally wrong, but it seemed like, as soon as I was elected and my election was over, and I was lucky enough not to have a runoff the first time, that I started getting information about, just about, like you said, insurance and stuff like that immediately. And my, my picture was taken so that I had a badge the first day I needed it and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not sure why that dragged on so long this year. I mean, I think if it isn't the standard, it has been most years, and it should be, that as soon as your election is clear, except for those that are in runoffs, and that makes it easier on the staff too, to not have to, wait and deal with all 40 people at once. If they can go ahead and start with 20 of them and get all those things done with them, then they can, be able to focus on the other folks, in September after the runoff. And I think that seems like a better method.
Jeff, how about you?
I am fortunate that Councilmember Claiborne before me started to bring me into meetings with specific people. As an example, Metro Water, Stormwater, Pennington Bend. To this day, I'm still dealing with some fallout issues from the May 2010 flood. But he brought me in with Tom Pelko. It was the first time I ever met Tom Pelko and Metro Water. And we sat down and we talked about all things Pennington Bend and the flooding and stuff like that. And my gosh, if I didn't have that kind of onboarding
shepherding
within the district and shepherding, that I would have been even drinking from a bigger fire hose if I didn't have that. So we can't necessarily, I guess, of course, force the council members to onboard their successors, especially if they politically don't agree and all that kind of stuff. But can we at least encourage that? Hopefully so.
So
I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
It really is helpful. It's something that I've thought about for the future. God willing, in 7 years, that whoever is running, that having concurrent conversations to say, this is kind of the landscape, this is what you can expect from your life moving forward, so that you're not just jumping in blindly and there's some kind of guidance. Clearly there are things that you can't divulge immediately, but some basic pieces of information are helpful, I think, and it would be wonderful. I plan on doing it.
Okay, good idea. I like that too. So, okay, well, I just went ahead and I added that to my notes, really, about what's permissible to do in advance versus what has to wait till after swearing in period. Because I just think about, I guess my vision is, hey, what can be done ahead of time? That is not, like you said, like having 30 of us trying to get our picture made in one day or one morning or whatever, versus what's happening after the swearing in to a certain period. And then kind of to the point about review sessions, like what needs to happen at six months later. Because like if I was thinking about that related to like if we had had our swearing in and then we had had a review period at 6 months, you know, that would have been right about the time we were having the tornado. And so that would have been a really good time to have a conversation about, hey, wait a second, we're having a natural disaster, but here's all the things that it wouldn't have been a great time from a logistics standpoint, but it would have been helpful to really get the additional guidance about, you know, what you should be doing. And also too, I guess thinking about, you know, running for office and then being in the seat, I definitely found that the issues that I was interested in were not necessarily the issues that I had to tackle to help residents after getting into office. And of course, I'm like, well, I didn't study all those things. I studied all these other things. So now I got to learn all this other stuff. So that also would have been something. So all these are really good ideas. And so I think this will help kind of frame what we're going to be doing. I want to go back to, though, just since it's 4:40, and I know that, you know, in the interest of time and not keeping people past our allocated time today, thinking about, Jeff, your comment about, you know, as far as this being time bound, had you gotten any feedback so far, I guess, from anybody else who may be interested in some of the other pillars that you were addressing? What's the vision about when we need to be done with whatever it is that we're producing? Is there a certain window that you're looking for?
Not yet. Obviously, we don't want this to take the rest of our term. You know, I mean, but in one sense, the onboarding program, you don't need until 2023, right? So,
True.
But we don't necessarily want to take 3 years to do.
But I think the benefit of that onboarding, we could all get some of that now because we still
Sure.
haven't got it.
Yes, yeah, so true. I can't imagine being a first-term council member and then within 6 months, tornado, pandemic, you know, I can't imagine what you guys have gone through.
Neither can we. We also can't imagine being here
So
for
I think,
the pandemic in 1 week.
all right. I think today you maybe just want to kind of scope out what are the main things we want to be able to accomplish in the months ahead, right? Budget. We got to have a laser focused on how to really train us on budget, right?
I was going to say that ought to happen in January. You know, that we talk about it in September, October in our onboarding, but then in January we come back and have a special training specifically on the budget. And we could practice on that in 2021 just to have it ready to go for 2023 or 2024. That's my thought.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that idea too, because you could, that'll definitely be one that we'll learn a lot in the second year of us going through it. And then we'll have more ideas about how we can continue to refine it for subsequent years for the end of the term. So that's a really good point. I like that.
So those on council that have either been budget and finance chairs or currently, right, I believe are Taneka, Bob, and Quante, right? I think those are the three. So, you know, I'd love to engage them in that process, of course. And then the finance department, right? Gee, how can they help us? You know, give us a little more insight about the processes they go through and whatnot, and be engaged with the content of all that, right? They want to be able to pass a process on to us, and for us to get it. They're all full-time employees. You know, we're constantly drinking from the fire hose. So how can we be more effective?
And Jeff, in regards to budget, one of the questions that I had is after we finally were able to pass our budget, then trying to take the document, you know, the 4-inch book that we had, that the mayor had presented, and try to figure out, okay, how what we passed fits into that. And there didn't seem to be a coordination of like going back to that document and changing the numbers or whatever did we finally end up with. So that then we had something to kick off the next time. I didn't feel like there was a good coordination of that.
Yeah.
And that's something that, you know, to Jeff's point, in working with the finance department, then we can make that request oh, how does this, now that we've gone through the whole voting process, can we get a new one? So we know what we're dealing with, especially when we start talking to constituents, because they will have multiple questions.
Right. And there, I don't feel like there's an easy thing I can just pull out to give them answers to.
Yeah. And I like the idea of, and I think one thing that I was not very clear about when we went through any initial budget conversations, really what finances, kind of the rules of the road, I guess, related to the finance department. Of course, I probably would have learned some of them, if I had been tenured and maybe it's, tried to do a substitute budget or something like that. But just learning things related to, hey, here's the conversation we had about what we could do in the future related to a budget versus here's what the boundaries are, the guide rails are about, kind of where our roles kind of really fit in, specifically around like the levy and, some of those questions that came up after the fact. So that would be helpful to understand more clearly up front is what are the rules of the finance department director, and where does their, I hate to say power, but I guess it really is power, but their responsibilities sit. So I put that down as something to consider as well, or learn more about.
And Jeff, it would be great to also talk, because we are in the midst of it and have been since March. What is an emergency plan for a council member? What is your go-to when your district is affected? Because I think what we saw this year was, oh my gosh, a tornado just hit my district. Now run, scramble. Whoever's next door, can you come and help me? But not knowing what's the chain? What department do I call first? And then we can galvanize with volunteers even, because we know what the structure is going to be. I think that would be helpful. Emergency planning.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I could have used that at the tornado, right?
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, you're right. I love it. We could absolutely use some guide. So we had a follow-up meeting today about 6 months of tornado. We had a meeting that Councilmember Vercher is leading, and ironically, it was only a couple days prior to the tornado that the long-term recovery group that I believe was kind of born out of the flood, trying to reestablish that group. And so I'm hopeful that their efforts, and this is one thing I mentioned, their efforts can tie in with ours, short-term, long-term, and be able to have a.
And we did have a mayor's office of resiliency, but those things change. But I mean, Eric Cole had been specifically tasked with, thinking through disaster preparedness and things like that. And we just need to find out where that landed, because it ebbs and flows, and maybe now since we've had the tornado and the pandemic, it will rise to the top again. But
It's good to know that it existed.
Exactly.
I didn't know that at all.
Right.
Wow. Okay.
So to find out, where, if it just got subsumed under something else and it's still sort of there, just knowing, who that person to contact is, would be good. Or maybe it did totally go away, but I don't think it did. I think there was too much work done.
Yeah. So you, with the result of that going away, so you feel like there's documentation we potentially could be going back and looking at.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm putting that down. Okay. So that, I know, Jeff, you said, main things we want to accomplish in the month ahead, or maybe you said months ahead, not month ahead.
Months. Yes. Yeah.
It's a very aggressive, I'd be like, yeah, the month ahead. All right, cool. We got October.
As a perfect example, what Berkeley just mentioned is, gosh, it would be great to have some budget documentation that we go into the next cycle. So that becomes more the priority then to get that going, right?
Yeah.
So at some point, I think we need to have a discussion about planning and zoning, right?
Yeah.
And that needs to be an onboarding discussion too. So perhaps as part of this whole effort here is to prioritize what we work on and when, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about, go ahead, Councilman.
I agree, budget to me seems the most imminent.
Yeah, I agree. About any other and of course, this will not be an exhaustive list, but it'll definitely be a starting point. And then, I don't know what's worthwhile if there's on Outlook. If we still have SharePoint sites and that kind of thing. But I guess we can figure out where we're going to store some of this information. So maybe once I send out the notes, then we can everybody can read it and add more of their commentary, and then we can actually figure out a place of where we're going to list things. Because I think one of the things that I really like about what Gloria said is just this idea of, hey, here are all the questions that have come up over time. And of course, now that we've been in the office for a little while, we know maybe some go-to people for specific questions, but just some things that have bubbled up where you just go, I had no idea where to go, and I've found out by accident or found out because I talked to a colleague or something like that. But maybe we can start to at least list some of those things, so that way we can build the kind of resources as we go along too. So that way, as things come up, we have a place to document them. I think the biggest thing, Jeff, I remember you had said, what do we want to make sure that we accomplish, and really that also includes not accomplish, like what do we want to exclude, from the scope of this. And one thing that I would like to exclude is, like, I do not want to try to write any department's information or be responsible for like organizing it or any of that stuff, because I know I'm not the subject matter expert for those departments. And so I feel like that's a good thing to exclude from the scope of our project, is we're really more about organization and here's what we need versus, hey, I'm going to take the planning department's materials and I'm going to pretend I'm a planner and I'm going to tell everybody how to do their job, that kind of thing.
No.
And Berkeley, you are now muted somehow.
Mute.
There you
Sorry,
go.
My phone was ringing and I forgot I muted it. I think, just to be able to have a list of, for each department, who's our liaison.
Yeah.
That if you can remember, that Lisa Milligan is our touch point, then she can get you to everything else.
Yeah.
But, and some of those liaisons are so good at contacting us on a regular basis, that's easy to know, but for some other departments. So just having that in an easy list, especially at the beginning.
And sometimes the questions, I will say, that I have found where I maybe built a relationship with somebody in a department, and so they had the unfortunate recipients of them being my go-to person, like, hey, you're awesome, I love you, I'm going to ask you these other questions now too. And sometimes that's turned into like a circular conversation where they've said, hey, try X, Y, and Z. And then I've gone to who our person should be. And then it's kind of come back full circle all the way back around as well. And so that, I think, using the liaisons, but then also too, as you form relationships, they're going to have they'll have different levels of expertise, and maybe they will, inadvertently direct you the wrong way, or maybe they'll have, good ideas that are pitfalls that you could potentially be dealing with too. So I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
So we need to be done prior to the end of our term, but not lose the momentum of, the fact that we're coming together and kind of the institutional memory of what that being a new person is like. So we don't want to lose that. And so I guess since it's 4:53, from a next step standpoint, like I mentioned, I have these notes and I will send them out to everybody, and maybe we can edit off of that one file just to keep kind of this first recollection intact. But then in the future, kind of going into this budget conversation, since, that is going to be the looming conversation, and there's going to be a lot for next year's budget as well. Do we want to, Jeff, I know you mentioned looping in our current chair and our previous chairs. Maybe that be a starting point for our subsequent conversation about, other than what's publicly kind of sitting out there, that we can all go and pull and read at our leisure. What are some other tactics maybe that we need to be thinking about related to the budget conversation, or resources we need to be looking at that maybe we just didn't this past time or didn't know to do? That will be important.
I would ask those three chairs, what do they wish that we had known or understood better?
That's a good question.
Because I think there are things that they took for granted that we got that maybe we didn't.
That's great.
And to that, would it be good for us to send out a survey to all the council members or do something where we start actually gathering the information rather than just a verbal conversation and things get lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And that's
Survey
something
Monkey?
and that's something that Jon Cooper did mention as well. I know Councilmember Murphy sent me a number of questions that, as they mentioned on the executive meeting call, there's other council members that have been talking to Vice Mayor Schulman about wanting to do something like this. And so this is an opportunity. Like I mentioned, it is gargantuan because we are the third largest local legislative body in the United States. But I do want everybody to be engaged. And I know that there's been already some efforts underway. So I kind of want to put them all under one umbrella. So I know that Councilmember Murphy has come up with a number of questions to try to survey council members about, your engagement with staff, things like that. Councilmember Henderson had some thoughts on that as well. So what I did was I think we should probably, I want to be sensitive about how the questions are formatted and stuff like that. So I want to really send it through like a lens of HR to make sure that we're asking questions appropriately and stuff like that. I would like to do that. So any ideas about questions for council members, that's probably just a safe filter.
Yeah, I think asking, each individual, what are the things you wish you had known? Because I've had so many people tell me they didn't know what they were doing until the third year. And, that's just not acceptable. I can see that most of your first year is learning, but I still feel like there's so much I do not know, and I want to know because I want to be effective. So we've got to figure out what it is that are the most important. And I would say that, it'd be really easy for us to go so many directions at once that we just get confused. I would urge us to tackle one section of a pillar at a time until we feel like we're pretty clear on that. Not meaning we can always come back later and make revisions, but I think rather than try to take on all the things that you mentioned, if we just look at the onboarding itself, or once the budget, what does that mean itself, and kind of focus on each of these as we go along, that it will be better. And then being able to freely share that information. Because I think, I know it was mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago in regards to affordable housing that we had a SharePoint, and I said, we do? Where's the SharePoint? How do I get to the SharePoint?
I probably said that at the first meeting, and there was one email, and that's.
I didn't know, and if so, how do we access it? Is there a SharePoint for every committee? Is there a SharePoint for all the council business? Or I thought everything was on our website. So I think those are some really basic things that are easy to forget to tell the new person.
Over and over.
Yeah, and Jeff, so just to be clear, so our group, we're only going to be doing onboarding, right? Or did we volunteer for more things than we thought?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, as Gloria said, there's so much. So you might want to list everything you'd like to accomplish, but then, like I said, prioritize it, right?
Yep.
There's only so many hours in the day. We all have the lives and other jobs and family and stuff like that, and council gig. So yeah, in order to be effective, I like the idea of prioritizing some sort of budget onboarding. And then just be able to list out the things you'd like to do. Yeah.
In addition to having the Survey Monkey for other council members to ask them their thoughts, are we also considering having perhaps our president and past chairs have a conversation with us as well to what worked for them? How did they go through the process? What didn't they know that they learned, or what things did they figure out beforehand that they brought with them to the table to be budget chair? I think that would also, viewpoint and perspective is so crucial.
That's an excellent point. And like yesterday, I had a great hour-long conversation with Rosie about what Vice Mayor wants to be able to do is try to spread out the committee meetings more, to be able to give more time for discussion. The reality is that may not really be possible for a number of reasons, but it's certainly a topic that we want to continue to talk about. But she mentioned a lot about how Vice Mayor Neighbors ran things, and how it's different than Vice Mayor Schulman. And so I like the idea of going back to previous council members or vice mayors and getting some institutional knowledge about what worked for you, what didn't, absolutely.
Yeah. In regards to the committee meetings, this is one of the things I have brought up to the vice mayor is one of my frustrations is feeling that our committees were rubber stamps. Because if you only have 15, 20 minutes before a council meeting, all you're doing is saying yes, no. You have really no clue because you don't have time to really get into things, and feeling like I wanted to be able to have an hour allocated. If we didn't need the hour, fine. If we only needed 10 minutes, fine. But knowing you have that hour allocated, or if it's on a different day or whatever, because it's very frustrating to feel like you're on a committee and whoop-de-doo-dah day, it means nothing because all you're doing is rubber stamping. And I think that happens so often. And we have this resource of our committee structure. To me, a committee should not only be taking what's being offered to, but maybe searching for things such as on affordable housing rather than just waiting for people to bring us a bill. Why not identify some things that affordable housing could be helpful and ask for those resources to come rather than only take what's presented. And that's true of many of the committees. We can say this is our goal. How can we serve our community through this committee rather than just be a yay stamp. Just go to council for a vote.
Committees is a big topic for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then it sounds like that really one of the very first things to do is this whole idea of a SurveyMonkey survey through HR to get additional feedback from other CMs that are not on the call today. And so, Joy, I know I'm not volunteering you to do anything, but is that an interest of yours, is to start to think through what questions that we're asking and come up with some ideas as a starting point, a first draft?
Do we also want to incorporate the ones from council members Murphy and Henderson, or do you think they would appreciate that?
Yes.
Councilmember
for
Murphy
sure.
had questions about how council members interact with staff and how they support you, and trying to be more thoughtful about how we can, better support our staff to help me help you, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't specific to.
Well, I will
onboarding.
say,
Okay.
I've spoken to both of those council members, and they do have feedback for onboarding.
Yeah.
So Councilmember Murphy has a font of questions and suggestions.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So I think it would be great to get that information together. And I'll do it. I love collecting.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Perfect. I
Yeah.
appreciate
So
that.
are we going to circulate, are we going to email each of the rest of the group the questions that we come up with and see if we need to add to that, or how are we going to come up with this?
I think that would be the wisest way. We can compile it. We can all review and see if we have any duplication anywhere. We want to be concise. I think the best way for a SurveyMonkey of this kind is to give some blanks. So how did you feel about X? And then give a box where they can expound on what their experience was.
So we'll send everything to you and Evan, you and Aaron, and y'all will be the compilers?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, that's a good thing.
Okay, good.
Okay, very good.
I'm delighted that we're taking this on.
Me too.
Yeah.
I'm very
Can't thank you
excited.
enough. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff, for corralling all of us in this energy around improvement and planning for the future.
All right.
I think it was perfect timing for
Yeah.
you to have brought it up.
Right.
It was at a good moment for us going into our second year to talk about how can this process be a little tighter.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, then I'll send you my summary information, and then Joy, I will sync up with you about your question draft, and then we'll share it with the whole group, and then we'll go from there. And then as we move forward, we'll figure out, maybe after we do the survey, like when we would need to have another conversation and what that will look like.
Great, thanks.
All right, and because I think the goal for me is I find that projects like this, I don't want it to linger forever. I think we will have to come to here's when we should have a start, an end date, and even if we're refining it, later on, that would still be better than it's hanging out there in the ether. So I think that will be
But
something.
do we want to set a next time that we're going to get together?
Why don't
we?
How about why don't we wait until after we do have the survey questions? Because I think then we'll know, like, when is HR going to deploy it? When will we have feedback back? And then we could use that next conversation to look at what the results are. Does that sound doable?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we don't suddenly realize it's 2 weeks later and we don't know where we are and we
Yes.
haven't had communication. I just don't want to do that.
I think it's pretty apparent that this group, we have organizational personalities and
Yeah.
like deadlines. So I don't think that we're going to have a problem with the work not getting done.
I'm no
Right?
engineer, but I would agree.
I have a touch of OCD, so that, and to that end, if you have some questions in mind, feel free whenever they strike you to just go ahead and email Aaron and I so we can get started. And we can always send a reminder on, say, Monday saying, hey, just in case you hadn't thought about it, just send them over to us. Oh, and by the way, as we're emailing each other, the next time we get together, I will be a year older.
A year.
Congratulations.
Happy birthday.
Happy early birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday. That's
All right. Well, then I will be back in touch. And I will say, I'm looking at the calendar right now. Today's September 10th. So I would say by the 24th, we will have here's what's happening with HR, and here are the questions that are going out. And then we will sync up again about a follow-up conversation.
That time frame probably actually works out really well because I did have a good conference call with J.O.N. Cooper and Shannon to talk about, do you have those resources? What could you do? All that kind of stuff. And so I asked her, I said, not to put, you've got all of Metro HR to run. So this is additional, I get. But when you start diving into it, just let me know when the next follow-up for that it should be. Is it 30, 60, 90 days? So by the end of this month, like the 24th, hopefully by then we should be hearing back from Shannon about the scope of her work as well. So
okay,
that's cool.
Good deal. That's awesome. All right. Good. Well, does anybody have anything else that needs to be shared for the good of the group? No? All right. Well, I appreciate everybody getting on the call today and
thank you, everybody.
Participating and being involved. I look forward to working with everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. All right. Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.